Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Mary Lauder, and you are listening to the Since You Put It That Way podcast. It's the show that examines various health, wellness, and medical topics from unique perspectives. We will be having discussions and guests that will cause you to pause and consider, well, since you put it that way. Well, welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to dig into some very interesting material on the Since You Put It That Way podcast. We have our first official guest, Dr. Martha Jo Atkins. And she is the author of the book Signposts of Dying and founder of the Dying School, also known as D School, which is designed to deepen conversations and abilities to care for others, friends, family, ourselves at the end of life. Dr. Atkins is an end-of-life counselor, a teacher, and a filmmaker. She is the founder and former executive director of the Children's Bereavement Center of South Texas and has served as the executive director of Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying in San Antonio. Dr. Atkins has spent the last several years combining her love of cameras and gadgets. That's interesting. We'll find out what that's about. With her end-of-life work, completing a 2-year filming project with her friend and mentor, Lee, in March of 2022. Sounds like you did that right through the pandemic.
Sure did.
Yeah. Martha is currently living from her suitcase and with the greatest of friends in and around the world. She's working via Zoom, traveling, writing, editing, and looking for the next dog to befriend.
That is so true. Yeah. I love a doggo.
Martha also has a TEDx talk, which I found, that's called There's More to Dying Than Meets the Eye, that's been viewed over 1 million times. Excellent. And you can find her TEDx talk posted on her website, which is www.marthajoatkins.com. So welcome to Martha Jo.
Thank you. So nice to be here on the inaugural podcast. Thanks for inviting me.
Our first
so fun.
It is. So what do you formally go by? Dr. Atkins, Martha Jo? What would you like?
Martha Jo is fine.
Okay, great. You can call me anything, just not late for supper. So that's
boom.
Exactly. I don't think it goes downhill from here. I thought I'd start at the high point.
That's good. I love it.
Yeah. So actually, starting at the end is what I thought would be a great way to kick off the podcast, since you put it that way. The goal of this podcast is for us to, at the end, kind of do a head scratch and go, well, since you put it that way, maybe there's things we need to consider differently.
Love that.
Yeah. So how does it feel to be the first guest? What do you think?
Well, I'm delighted. I love to be the first guest. That's really fun.
Yeah.
And then I agree, talking about the end. So there's living differently, living better is an interesting prospect.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been told when you write a book, you write the epilogue first. So what is it that you want the reader to leave with?
Mm-hmm.
So similarly, which is not easy to say, what is it about the end of our life that we want to know about how to live our life?
Well, I am partial to community, being involved in end of life, and partial to connection and meaning making. And I think when those things happen together with people you love, the end of life experience can be, I say good. There's lots of conversations about a good death and how we shouldn't really talk about a good death. That a death is a death and no comparing. And still, there are some that seem to be easier than others. The piece about that, though, PIECE and PEACE, both, I think has to do with who you have around you. And I think that is true for life, too. Who you spend your time with and listen to and talk to, and all of those things matter. And matter at end of life and matter in regular life.
Yeah. So when you say about community around the end of life, I think of things, coming from the physician standpoint, the medical world, people at the last minute showing up, the trauma drama sometimes around the end of life, I call that.
Mm-hmm. There is that.
Yeah, sometimes we see that in a hospital setting.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a nursing home setting or extended care facility.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if the individual has chosen to be at home at the end of their life and that those pieces are in place through hospice and other services, you have that.
Mm-hmm.
So what has been your experience? Because you mentioned good death, not a good death. I don't know that I would judge anything because I understand how you see a death as a death. But I agree that there's a different feeling about different processes and experiences that people have.
For sure. Yeah, there really are. Okay, so what was the what was the question?
The first, that was a statement, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, the question was, what have you seen in the community part that makes it
Got it.
I'm going to have to use the word a good death.
Yeah.
Without a judgment to it.
Okay, so we'll say death is on a continuum, and things happen in different ways when somebody is leave taking. When the dying person has an opportunity to call in the people they wish to have there and have the capacity to do some orchestrating in the way they wish to live into their ending, it can be really sweet. The dying isn't easy. For a few people, it looks easier than others.
Right.
It takes a while for a body to shut down, and having people around who, I'll use that word capacity again, have the capacity to be in that kind of space without the trauma drama you were talking about, being able to be grounded and centered and peaceful while the person is doing their work makes a huge difference. And the meaning making that the people at the bedside make matters. So you and I would look at the same person and likely see different things, and a family member would look and see something else, and everybody makes different meaning.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that meaning comes from the stories we tell ourselves?
Oh, sure. It comes from culture. It comes from deaths that we've been to before, and we think maybe they're going to all be that way. Every death is different, and what our parents told us or didn't tell us, and if the dog was sent away to the farm, or if we got to bury the dog and have a funeral. I mean, all those things matter. The death. Kubler-Ross talked about death denying culture in I think it was 1972. She did the talk about getting Medicare to a Senate hearing, and she used that phrase, death denying culture, and it's still used today. And I think we are less so. And I also think there are those among us who are willing to talk about it, and people are interested in talking about it and hearing about it. And we need more of that. So around the bedside, it can be more peaceful.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think of our anti-aging culture.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that is a death denying culture aspect?
I don't know. I have some friends who are very much researching longevity and taking the potions and things and look great and feel great. And others who struggle, who are 50 years old and look 70.
Yeah.
I don't know. I appreciate people who have a zest for life that causes them to want to live and be a part of it as long as they can. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And other people don't have that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's, I don't know. I say I don't know a lot because I really don't.
Right.
I get to see lots of people and hear lots of stories, and the the more I hear, the more questions I have.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it's a very complex issue. If we think of, I think of people who want to age well
Hmm.
versus anti-aging.
Yes, there's a difference, isn't there?
There is, and I think think of living well versus anti-living, you know, or dying well versus anti-dying.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing like probiotics versus antibiotics. And
Yes.
so, I always come from the philosophy that the body has the inherent capacity to heal.
Hmm.
How it was designed, how we evolved, all of the pieces that go with that.
Hmm.
And at some point in time, and we use then in medicine heroic measures to bring the body back frequently from the brink, right?
Yes. Yes.
And if anybody's been in a near dying experience through an infection, through a cardiac event, some kind of accident or trauma, the wonders and the miracles of medicine are very amazing.
Indeed.
And there's that component of it. And then there's the other component of when the body begins to, at the end of life, just give out. Mm-hmm. And the life sustaining measurements or measures are futile or short of futile or not helpful.
Yes.
And talking about how do you approach someone when you see them kind of struggling without bringing a judgment on them or pushing them or putting ideas in their head? What does that look like in the work when you do some work one-on-one with folks?
In my world, that is just coming alongside someone, and it can be coming alongside the person who's dying or coming alongside their family. I have had conversations with families who are sure their person who's dying is in denial and this could be easier, and there's this churning. And the flip side of that is I've had conversations with the dying person who says, "Oh my God, my family won't let me go. They don't understand how tired I am, and I just want them to let me rest." So my opportunity as a facilitator sometimes is to facilitate a conversation without judgment, without, I think you should do this. Sometimes I'll tell a story about a way another family or person has handled something to give them something to push off of. Yeah. But it's not my job to tell anybody what to do. Mm-hmm. And if they, sometimes people don't want to take medicine and clearly they're hurting. And it's a thing to be with somebody who's in that kind of suffering. And and I know that there's some things that could be done to help them not suffer, and they're not willing. And the constellation of people around who know exactly what needs to happen, and it's fascinating to me. Mm-hmm. It's just fascinating. So it's not always easy. It's not always easy.
I don't think it's ever easy.
Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes, like with my there's this sweet little Romanian woman who came in. She said, "This is exactly what she said. I want to die." She sounds like Count Dracula, and she was about 4'10" and might have weighed 90 pounds.
Yeah,
Martha, I want to die. Like, yeah. Okay, come here and die.
Yeah.
I walked in her room one day. She had a Dr. Pepper, and her teeth were rattling around in her mouth because nothing fit anymore.
Yeah.
And she was just a delight. And she told the stories. She made a bra, one of the first bras in the 1950s for women who'd had breasts removed. Okay. And so, so those kind of, she knew she was going. She was ready to go.
Yeah.
She was tidying up things. Her
Yeah.
family would come in all black, and she would pat them on the cheek. And it was the most marvelous thing because she was teaching them.
Yeah.
And I guess the other people, the other people are teaching too. When I see someone struggling, I think, oh, I'm learning from them. That's not how I want to die.
Right.
It's a good lesson.
Yeah. So you've got this little lady then who embraced and knew she was dying. What were the stories of her life that you could look back and say, well, she was dying well, if we could use that term, and she lived well? I mean, was there a correlation there? Or...
She had lived a long life. She'd been with her family. She brought her whole family over from, or her family brought her. I don't remember how that happened, but they all ended up together.
Yeah.
And community, and they loved on each other, and they took care of each other. And there was a point where she needed to go in a nursing home for a little while from respite care. And you know that time happens when often people will get away from their families and they can sink in, and that's exactly what happened for her. And she was ready to go, and she told them, and they listened. I think that not every family can do what they did. They don't have the tendrils of love and joy and peacefulness. They have not been able to get there, but this family did, and it was wonderful. It was really wonderful. So I have a hunch that it's that people don't always die like they live. In this case, I suspect that she did.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds very much like she did. Especially Martha, I want to die.
Martha, you gotta roll your R. Martha, I want to die. She was great.
Yeah. So at the heart of your work, what do you feel your mission is individually with folks, and maybe, kind of a tagline for what you do?
I don't know that I have a tagline. I am at a place in my life where I really try to lead and live from my heart.
Yep.
I probably cry more than a lot of people. I don't know. It's hard to judge, but I cry a lot, and it makes me laugh sometimes.
When you're working,
I just am. No, not often. Not when I'm working with people, but probably that's part of it. Is there's a holding that there's a holding that happens that I have leaned into as I've done this work for, I don't know, 30 years. And maybe that's it. I don't cry with people very often. Sometimes I do.
Yeah.
But man, I can cry at a commercial, or I can cry when somebody wins a tennis tournament, or the dog brings me a toy and looks at me with that special look in her eye. I can. It's funny. It's really funny. But I think that speaks to that's just I'm tender. I have a tender heart, and I have a tender space for this work, and I try to work from love.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good. So the tagline might be, which was in part of your bio, is end of life counselor, teacher, and filmmaker.
Yeah, that's kind of boring.
I was trying. I was reaching. Tell me a little bit about this filmmaking that you're doing, what impact it's had on you, and then the clients and patients you've worked with. This is fascinating to me.
I love to take pictures. I love to size up a scene and capture people in precious moments and novel moments, and play it back for them, and then talk about what's happened. I started doing filming a long time ago. When I worked at the Children's Hospital, I did some filming, and I've just always enjoyed it. And during the pandemic, I was alone in my office computer with the Amazon button too much, and got some equipment and started playing with it. And my friend Glee was interested in having her end of life documented. and I had been doing some filming at a boat already, and so we started.
Mm.
It ended up being um, it ended up being an opportunity for her to show up every week and talk about what she needed to talk about. We happened to be filming. Some of that stuff is going to be used for teaching, some of it won't. It gave her a chance to be seen in a way that I make up she was not seen in her life. I think there was some spaces in her that didn't feel held or nurtured, and there was something about that particular work that offered that for her. I love the I love the gadgets and the microphones and the putting all that stuff together, and it was really a fun project to do that with her. And we got to do the last 4 months pretty much. There were a couple of us that lived with her and got to do lots of filming and lots of audio conversations, and it was just quite a gift. It's really, really quite a gift.
Yeah.
I think we talk about somebody's dying, and then we go right to when they died. We talk about the funeral,
Yeah.
and there's this space here. And if we don't talk about the space, then people don't know what happens in the space, and they're worried about it. And they're scared. And if I can show some examples of people on hospice who are living into their ending in ways that might open space for people to be less frightened, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. It is. I think people frequently say to me, I'm not necessarily afraid of death. I'm afraid of how I'm going to die.
Yeah.
So taking that fear, and fear, has a very close relationship with anxiety.
For sure. And excitement.
Yeah. And anxiety has a huge, huge impact with panic.
Yes.
So like, hello to that family tree, And anxiety is an emotion. Anxiety can be a state or a trait depending upon the length of time we're in it, right? Or if we tend towards. But really, anxiety at its core is an emotion, and what we're doing is requesting more information. We feel in a fight or flight or freeze situation in our nervous system and our emotions because we need more information to know what to do. And our body has a way of processing that learning quickly and then long-term learning to handle. So you're saying about getting information out regarding that space between when you're dying, the death, and the funeral. That call for information and that provision of information may be something that would really decrease the anxiety that folks have.
Long time ago, I worked in a couple of children's hospitals as a child life specialist. We did psychosocial support for kids and families. I worked in an intensive care unit and on a neuroscience unit, and we would do preparations in the PICU, often for siblings to go in and see their brother or sister. Sometimes the child was on a ventilator. Well, often they were on a ventilator, and often they were not long for this world. And we would take pictures and show the kid what they were seeing, what their brother and sister looked like, so they could go in and be a part of it. I hated the doors. You push the button and the doors swing open and people walk through and the kid is standing there. Yeah. So that kind of preparation is in me. I did videoing one time of a little girl who was in the unit for a long time, and her sister missed her terribly and was starting to act out and having all kinds of trouble. And so we did videos for the sister, and the mother came back to me about 6 months later and said the little girl who had been so sick was the one who was watching the videos, and she was watching them every day because she needed to process what was happening to her. She wanted to know what all this stuff was. So I think there's some benefit to being able to be retrospective about we hear ourselves talk, see ourselves act in a particular way, look at that, and it helps us make sense of things and make meaning of things.
It does.
Yeah.
And it helps us process the trauma.
Yeah.
Because if you have something recorded and you can learn from it time and time again, you take pause in between, and literally your brain, that's the things we feel bonking around up and down and shifting back and forth. It literally goes from the midbrain to the higher centers of learning, the cortex, to try and organize in its hierarchy. What are you supposed to learn should you see that situation again?
Yeah. Pattern seeking.
Yeah.
The beautiful piece about the filming is it's the camera, all of that's happening, but there's this other exchange, verbal, nonverbal, energetic exchange that's happening between me and the person or whomever is being filmed. And I think that cannot be overstated, how important the nervous system to nervous system experience is. If one of the systems is a little unsettled and the other one is settled,
Yes.
to help the one that needs some settling, to have an experience of being in a place with somebody who's grounded and still and present. That kind of presence is a real gift.
It is.
It's a real gift.
Think of the camera as literally a medium. I mean,
Yes.
that's many senses,
Yep.
many definitions.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it's interesting when you ground someone to let them go. As a physician, early in my career, I was with people who passed away who I never knew, but I was at their bedside when they passed, whether it was the intensive care unit or the general medical floor. And that was, and I remember we had one rotation, it was nights. So we had 30 days of nights, it's like a month of Sundays, right? And
gosh, it makes me tired just hearing that.
It was hard. But the beauty of that, of what happens in the middle of the night, is kind of amazing.
It is.
There was this lady who was all by herself. She came in from an extended care facility and her family wasn't in the community. And I remember saying to the nurse, please let me know when her breathing really changes and we see those signs of that death is imminent. I said, because she should not, I would prefer she's not alone. And so then they called me and I was sleeping and I came out of where, we had our call room and spent the next half hour, 40 minutes just with her, holding her hand. I didn't know her. I didn't know anything about her. But what I remember was imagining what her life was, how many things she experienced, and even the basic things like in the culture, electricity, no electricity, running water, all those things that she could have experienced I had no clue about. Raising a family, all the ups and downs. And I was overwhelmed with her life, not even knowing her.
Yeah.
And being able to hold, as you say, that space, that presence, that grounding for her to simply pass away very peacefully.
Mm-hmm.
That was an experience that changed me as a young physician.
It's quite something, isn't it?
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And,
you did it. Nobody asked you to do it. You felt that thing in your heart. A therapist said to me one time, I got in trouble. I got in trouble for doing the very same thing you just did. My brother had died not very long before, and I was chastised because I was projecting. And I had this really great therapist at the time, and she said, Martha, you were doing what people have done for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. You hold somebody's hand when they're dying. That's what you did. And that's what you did.
Yeah. And so what you're saying is you got in trouble for holding someone's hand while they were dying?
I did not get in trouble in the moment, and it was exactly the right thing to do. And I'm glad I did it. I did get chastised a bit. Yes. And that's okay.
Yeah. I've been there in that situation. But it's typically, I was told I talk too much to the patients. You chat too much. Yeah,
Oh,
I was the one who could always come up with the diagnosis and figure out how they actually were, because I spent that time chatting with them. So,
yeah, imagine that.
well, whatever. Interesting. Um, yeah, and I remember too when my grandmother died. I was very close to her, named after her, in fact, and she she was in an extended care facility, and her health was very frail, and she had what really was a stroke more in the lower parts of the brain. So she had rapid breathing, rapid heart rate for, gosh, almost 30 hours. It was just very amazing how she survived that to that extent. But it allowed all the family, extended family, to come, and she had 6 kids, 24 grandchildren, 44 great grandchildren, and 8 great great grandchildren. Yeah.
Wow.
And
what a lineage.
yeah. And so that was an amazing experience. And that was one of the first times when I understood the veil between one side and the other.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about that, and it gets, to some extent, people think it gets kind of woo-woo, but it's really not. It becomes so real.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, for me too.
Yeah, and what I really sensed was my grandmother came from love and went back to love. And the room was sparkly and tingly, and we had been up with her all night, all of the extended family, and then my husband and I had left to go get cleaned up to come back, and it wasn't 10 minutes after we left that she passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent, hours before holding her hand. And so kind of got a sense I had to get out of there for her to pass as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so but that veil was there. It was real. And she was in a Catholic nursing home. She was not Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
She thought Jesus looked very handsome hanging on the wall in the pictures.
That's terrific.
And she had lots of funny stories about that place. It was a great facility, and they so lovingly cared for her. And then at the same time that she passed, they were having chapel down the hall, and they literally were praying for the sick, and her name was mentioned. And then simultaneously, just within a minute, she had passed. It was just beautiful. So you can't orchestrate that. You can't write that stuff. You can't, that's just that when that kind of life unfolds, it's very beautiful.
There's synchronicities or something.
Yeah.
Something special. Yeah.
So stepping into then that veil, and people pass over, pass on. What about the folks that are left behind? Are we technically left behind? Are we for sure left behind? How thin is that veil? What's your experience around that for living and dying, and for those of us who are still walking and breathing and talking?
It's an odd thing to put your loved one on a gurney and put him in the back of a van and then go back in your house and go about your business and walk down the hall and expect to see them in a room.
Yeah.
My mom I worked with a long time ago told me the goneness gets longer. And I loved that. I've never forgotten that. And I had that experience myself when my brother died. The goneness just got longer and longer.
Yeah.
There's I don't know. It's the meaning making again. And do you meaning make that this is a separation, or do you meaning make that there's another relationship to be had in a different way? Mm-hmm. And yes, sadness, they're not here the way we wanted them to be. And can there be a way of communicating and connecting that's different. That's metaphors, that's through animals and wind and I don't know, synchronicities that show up.
Yeah.
There's a researcher in Arizona whose daughter died some years ago. She had an amazing armoire that I was really pleased that she shared it on Facebook, this picture. And it felt really, I'm going to use the word holy.
Yeah.
It just filled with things that she would have given to her daughter over the years that she did. She created this way to connect with her. And there are people who would say she needs to get rid of all that stuff and shut it down and move on with her life. And there are other people who will say she's exactly how she's moving on with her life. She's including her daughter in it.
Yeah.
So we get to figure out what works for us. Yes. There's lots of people who have ideas, and we're the ones who ultimately know what we need.
Right. So what I hear you saying is a life lived is just as unique as a death, as a death, and even our approach and grief to that death.
Yeah. And grief is a fascinating. I'm just going to say a fascinating animal. I'll call it an animal. For me, has felt overtaking by moments and couldn't find my way out of it, and then eventually learning how to be with it, and then eventually learning how to be alongside it.
Yeah.
It doesn't go. I remember being so devastated the 366th day after my brother died, because I really genuinely, in my 24-year-old self, thought I was going to feel better on the 366th day. I genuinely, I was going to feel better, and I didn't. And I cried so hard that day.
Yeah.
Because I didn't feel better.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is never going to end.
Yeah.
And it hasn't ended, but it sure has shifted.
Yeah.
Sure has shifted.
Well, grief can be very much just announcing and indicating a change in the relationship. Other feelings I've experienced was sadness, of course, anger. Yeah, there's denial. But I think one of the biggest ones is anguish. They define, Brene Brown has that amazing book, The Atlas of the Heart. Anguish is defined by knocking you off your feet, by your knees buckling.
Yes.
And your bones crushing. And I have felt that. Yes. And until I understood and learned that definition of anguish, I couldn't figure out what I was feeling with my grief. It was beyond sad. And that's what I kept saying. It's like I didn't have the words. So when we have the words or the emotions and understand the definitions, it really helps fill in what we're feeling and identifying that.
It does. And I will add again, being with somebody who can be in presence with you when you're in that kind of space multiplies the healing, multiplies our capacity to be with that. And it's humaning together. We get to be human together in that way. We don't have to do it by ourselves.
Yes.
And community is so important.
It is. And I think the community also helps with the complexity, because as you were saying, different components, different perspectives people have that they bring to the experience of death and dying of the loved one, but also the perspectives of if there's a lot of medical technology or medical process or procedures involved. Everybody has a perspective. They have their experience as you go through it. And if curated well, if handled well, which means open-hearted curiosity, ability to respect one another and not get triggered by stuff, that can be a very, very strong community for healing.
Very much.
Yeah.
Very much.
So what do you think patients should know when they're faced with a terminal diagnosis?
Hmm. Uh, Again, so individualized.
Yeah.
Um, I would hope that they would have somebody to call, and not everybody does have somebody to call, but somebody to be in the space of, this thing has just happened to me. I've just gotten this news. I'm right here now. Whatever it is, can you come and be with me?
Yeah.
That there's um, there's a web of connectedness.
Mhm.
And we talk, I know I've talked about community a lot. This place, there is a point of this where community is around, but the person has to do the work on their own.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful thing to have people with you when there's nothing they can do but be with you, but they can be with you wholeheartedly. That presence piece. There's an energy that is created that is buoying, and it can be felt.
But really, I think that's an excellent point, because you're witnessing the work that the individual has to do.
Yeah. I was with a woman once who I walked into her room and she was holding her side. And I said, "Tell me what's happening." And she said, the horses were moving. And I said, "Tell me about the horses." And she said, "They were in my dream last night and now they're here." Now she had some kind of tumor. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what she had, but there was something happening in her stomach. And as we talked, and as she felt into this thing that was happening in her stomach, she began to cry. And it wasn't a little cry. It was the anguish cry. That kind of vulnerability,
Yeah.
from us as humans, one human to another human. It's so hard to, I'll speak for myself. It's hard for me to be in a place of anguish with very many other people. I have a very small circle of people that I feel like I would do that with, except, when things hit you and you buckle and you can't stop yourself.
Right.
But that kind of vulnerability and openness allowed her to get to a place of peacefulness.
Yeah.
And her process moved along really quickly after that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
It's hard to be vulnerable. We have lots of reasons not to be. Lots of things have happened in life that keep us protected and closed. And if there is a hospice person to trust, or a clergy person to trust, or I don't know, the CNA who came and took care of my mama was just extraordinary. They had quite a relationship that the rest of us had. And you think about that intimate body care.
Yes.
You're the last person who's ever going to bathe me.
Yes.
I mean, that it's a profound thing. Yeah. And to be really present with that and live it.
Yeah.
That's to me, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's living your ending.
Yeah. And I think, I think you've just summarized the entire conversation perfectly. Life isn't easy. Death isn't easy. We're wired for connecting to ourselves, finding that
Yep.
peacefulness within us,
Yep.
finding that peacefulness and connection with others.
Yep.
It's not going to be with a huge amount of people, but just a few who get us and
Yep.
see us and care for us at an intimate level.
Yep.
And to the extent that we can be open to that vulnerability, meaning we show up as who we are without control over the outcome,
Yes.
it requires tremendous courage.
Yes.
That defines how we then shall live.
I love it.
It's wonderful.
I love it.
Well, it's been delightful, Martha, to have you here as our inaugural guest. The stories and the information have been very valuable. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time, your expertise. I appreciate who you are and the space that you hold for the individuals you work with and how important that is. And
Thank
your
you.
heart, as tender as it is strong and mighty as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that you're willing to have this conversation on your first foray out into this. It speaks to your willingness to go to difficult places, and I hope this will open conversations and new ways of thinking for folks. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And since you put it that way, right? I think that we will have more great conversations.
Yeah.
All right. Well, bye from here.
Okay. Bye from here. We'll see you next time.
Yes. Thank you for joining us on the Since You Put It That Way podcast. Today's episode was written and produced by Crowded Table Productions. Technical editing, Malin Long Lopes. Sound editing, Jonathan Fiegel. Music, The River Jordan, written and performed by May Erlewine. Please rate and review our podcast as well. We appreciate your feedback, and hey, be positive, share the love.